This is Off Script with Trish Glose, intimate interviews with interesting people, and in front of my microphone today is Mr. Bob Hunter. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Currently the associate editor with the Mail Tribune,
Correct.
but a lot of people know you as you were the jefe, the head honcho at the Trib for a while. You were the editor.
I was.
For how long?
20 plus years.
Wow. Okay. We're going to talk about a lot about paper and the business in a little bit. But first, where are you from originally?
Well, I grew up in Idaho, Meridian, Idaho.
Okay.
My dad had a weekly newspaper of all things.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pretty sure that was the last thing I wanted to do in my life, having got to sweep the floors and haul newspapers around and that sort of thing. So I did it. I did that while I was a kid and went off to school, and I thought maybe I'll become a lawyer. So then I went to Willamette University and took a lot of political science classes with people who were intent on becoming lawyers, and decided I don't think I want to do that.
Okay.
After all.
So your dad had a weekly newspaper. What was the paper called? Do you remember?
The Valley Times. It was in Meridian, Idaho.
Okay. And so was it a valley that you guys lived in?
Right. It's right near Boise. It's about 10, 12 miles from Boise. But he also bought out a bunch of other little papers from big municipalities like Kuna.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this weekly newspaper, just community events, stories,
Yeah, it was local news, a lot of community events, no wire. It was all, his favorite story. He actually, before we were in Meridian, we were in Ashton, Idaho, which is near Yellowstone, and he had the weekly newspaper there. And his favorite story there was there were two women, and every week it was Mabel Smith would visit Sarah Jones, and the next week it was Sarah Jones would visit Mabel Smith. And he finally said to somebody in the office, he said, "What's the deal?" And they said, "Well, they're sisters and they live next to each other. But every week they send in this little news item that they visited each other and had tea." So he said, "Well, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to run that anymore. That's ridiculous."
Oh, okay. I like it.
They both came in and said, "We're canceling our subscription."
Oh, no.
And he said, "Okay, we'll run it." So it was back in the paper.
Right. So did you grow up with siblings?
I have a brother who's still in Idaho.
Okay. And I'm assuming he helped with the paper too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you say help with the paper, did you do the whole delivery route? Was that part of your job?
No, it was more the night when the press was running.
Okay.
It was once a week. So the press would run and somebody would have to pull papers off and get them stacked. And then I also did the mailing, which was, it had a little foot treadle thing, and these cards would supposedly shuffle in there, and you'd stamp the address on it. And it was very high tech.
Okay, sounds like it. How old were you when all this was going on?
Probably in like early high school,
Okay.
junior high, early high school. When I got older in high school, I got like a real job where I actually got paid instead of just got room and board.
Sure. I think there's something about, because obviously the business of newspapers has changed drastically since your dad owned a newspaper.
It has, for sure.
I guess it always appears that there was something, I don't know if it's mysterious or kind of sexy about having a newspaper back then, because we're talking about, what decade is this?
This was in the 60s. He sold it in the 70s.
Okay.
So 60s and 70s.
Right. It's just, that was what we did. Our newspaper was out on the driveway, and we brought it inside and actually opened it up, and you got the feeling on your fingers, and
the ink.
And and it has changed so much since then.
Yeah, things have definitely changed.
But there's definitely something about the way we used to create a newspaper.
Yeah, and a lot of that's the same. Now it's computers.
Sure.
You walk into a newspaper office, into a newsroom, it looks like it could be an insurance company.
Sure.
Everybody's got a desk and a computer.
It's quiet too.
It's a lot quieter.
A newspaper newsroom is much quieter than a TV newsroom. That's all I'm going to say. Yeah.
The old newsrooms used to have typewriting, the real typewriters, and they'd be clackety-clack.
So it was a buzz.
All over the room,
Sure.
and now it's much quieter.
Okay. What were you like in high school?
What was I like in high school? I don't know. I was just a regular kid. Played some sports. None of them particularly well.
Were you good in school, as far as academics go?
I was like a, A, B
Okay.
student, and until I hit physics, I think it was. And then it dropped off a little bit at that point.
Okay, so you went to, you said Willamette University, because
right.
you were gonna be an attorney.
That was my plan.
Okay.
Very kind of fuzzy plan.
Right.
Yeah.
When did it hit you that you were just like, nope, I'm done?
Probably about my second semester at Willamette in a political science class with Sue Leeson was a professor. She went on to be on the Oregon Supreme Court.
Oh, wow.
And she was tough. And it was a very, it was a bunch of wannabe lawyers who were all very into it, being competitive. I was kind of more into being a college kid. And
oh, there you go. The extracurricular activities of being in college?
There was.
Of course there are.
Some of that.
So just a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, when did the journalism bug bite you? Was it while you were at Willamette or later?
At Willamette, a friend, a guy in the same dorm, worked for the Salem paper covering high school football games.
Okay.
And he said, hey, they need somebody else. You want to do that? And I said, sure, it sounds cool. You got paid, go to a high school football game. So I did that that was the Capital Journal then, which no longer exists.
Right.
Now it's the Statesman Journal.
The Statesman's Journal, yeah.
Used to be 2 papers there, now there's 1. And did football games and basketball games and baseball games, which I'm not really a baseball guy, but I wrote about them anyway.
Right. But, was it fun for you? Was it something that you liked?
Fun.
Okay.
It was fun, and you got to go. That was still in the days of, the noisy clackety-clack newsrooms, so it was exciting.
So when did that first job after school come? Did you want to go work for a paper? Was that the plan?
That was, I don't know that I really had a great plan. After school, the first thing I wanted to do was go skiing for a year, which I managed to do mostly. And then I had to start paying bills, so.
Yeah. Where'd you go skiing that year?
We went Sun Valley.
Okay.
Hung out with some friends, went to Utah.
Nice.
Jackson Hole. Went to all the places. Of course, back
Good.
then you could ski at those places for $20 or something.
Right.
A little more than that now.
So then after that, you sort of take a year off to go skiing. You got to pay the bills, but was it like, I'm going to go work for a paper? I want to do this reporter thing?
Yeah, actually the first thing I did at the end of that year, I think it was, I worked on the Frank Church's presidential campaign. So that was like when was that? 72, I think. And that didn't go anywhere. But when I got done with that, there was I don't remember exactly how I came across it, but I found out there was a job opening at the Polk County Itemizer Observer.
Ooh.
In Dallas, Oregon, not to be confused with Dallas, Texas.
Of course.
And I went there, and then the guy who was the publisher of the paper was really into politics. And so we had this 2-hour conversation about politics and about the presidential campaign and all this interesting stuff, and never really talked about what my qualifications were. And at the end of the 2 hours, he said, "You're hired." So that's how I got started.
What kind of stories were you doing in the beginning?
Oh, everything. I did, I covered City Hall, I covered sports, and I wrote the wedding and engagement stories.
Ooh, really?
Yeah. I got to know what baby's breath was. Well.
So with the engagement stories, do they send those in to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
They send them in a form. There's a form, and they fill it all out, and yeah.
Oh, man, that's hilarious. What kind of reporter were you back then? Were you aggressive? Were you?
Yeah, I'd say so. We got in an ongoing battle with one county commissioner in particular, and then I remember a friend said, "Man, I'd like to get the paper every Wednesday because I know there's going to be something where you guys are going to be going at each other."
Right.
So,
something juicy.
So
in the
yeah,
paper.
was fairly aggressive. Although doing 10 things at once, it was sometimes hard to be aggressive because you were just so busy being busy.
Now you got to make deadline.
You got to make deadline. That was once a week. Was Monday night? Was Monday or Tuesday night? I'm trying to remember now. I think it started Monday and went into Tuesday, but those would be 12, 14-hour days. And sometimes back then, and you had no wire service. I can remember one time we got to the end of the night, and we still had space on the paper that we hadn't filled. We didn't have anything left. We dug down through these drawers, and we found these old paste-ups from like some history piece, and we like
Put 'em
figured
in.
it out, stuffed them in there.
Put 'em in
and
there.
They ran.
Yeah, the Associated Press wires, which we get those now too, it's just this never-ending feed of stories that are happening across the country, around the world. And I don't. Sometimes it's like, what did we do before the AP wires?
Right, and there's so much. The hardest thing with AP is not what to run; it's kind of what not to run.
Right, right.
You know, there's so much, and if you can run 20 stories in a paper, well, that's maybe 10%, maybe 5% of what they move.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of the stories are not that interesting to people.
Not interesting, not relevant.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess, how did you move up then in the ranks? Because you started out as a reporter in Dallas, Oregon. So how did that, from there to being editor at Mail Tribune?
Long, tortuous journey. Let's see.
Long journey.
Yeah. So I stayed there for a while. Then my wife got a job. She worked for Meyer & Frank. She got a job as a buyer in Portland.
Okay.
So I was at the Polk County Itemizer Observer for 4 years, maybe 3 or 4 years. She got this job in Portland. I tried commuting for a while.
Yeah,
that was
work.
no fun. Yeah,
No.
that was no fun. And then I got a job at Merrillhurst College, which was a kind of a back to college thing for adults,
Okay.
which just announced a couple weeks ago that they're closing their doors.
Oh, that's a little sad.
Yeah, but it was, so I did that for a couple years, and then the the Eugene paper bought a bunch of papers out in Washington County, Beaverton, out that area. So I went to work there. I was a city editor there.
Okay.
Wanted to get to a daily paper, and ended up probably 4 or 5 years later moving to Roseburg,
Oh, okay.
which my wife was a little askance about. And we had a baby.
Okay. Okay. So how long were you guys in Roseburg?
So we were in Roseburg for 3 years about, and then job opened up in Medford, moved to Medford. That was 33 years ago.
Okay. And then it's kind of the rest is history a little
The
bit.
rest is history. Yeah.
What was your first position at the Trib?
City editor.
Okay.
So so I was in charge of the news reporters.
Oh, okay. So kind of making sure that they were, like, kind of assigning them stories?
Yeah,
Okay.
assigning and editing and
Okay.
juggling all kinds of things. So.
Did you ever want to be the editor of the paper? Was that a goal?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah?
I think it was. Not in a way that I was actively looking around for it to happen, but it just kind of happened.
And I guess, I mean, it may be hard to talk about some of the differences, but when you started at the Mail Tribune, what was it like? I mean, what year are we talking?
85.
Okay. And so very different, even just,
It was very different, yeah. We had, we were working on computers then, but it went through this elaborate process that I couldn't repeat how it worked. And
Right.
I remember photos, if we, you got photos they spat out of a machine from the AP, and you'd have 100 photos, and every morning one of the first things you do, you come in and you go through this big stack of photos, and like, no, maybe, no, yes, and you'd end up with a dozen photos maybe, and then have to wean that down. But
Yeah.
it was pretty different.
What were some of the big stories you remember, just even being at the Trib for so long? Some of the really big ones that you guys tackled or that made the front page? It's the ones that really stick out to you.
The biggest one that really sticks out was in the mid-'90s. We heard that our congressman, Wes Cooley, that there were some questions about his claims about his military background, that he had said he was in special forces in Korea. And we actually had a bureau in Washington, D.C. at the time, and we worked with the reporter in Washington, D.C. He filed a Freedom of Information Act, got Cooley's not his war records, but his service records.
Okay.
The DD-214. I still remember the name of it from that. And it showed that he'd never served in Korea.
Uh-oh.
And so so we broke that story. It took off. The Oregonian grabbed it and ran with it. Everybody was on it.
Everybody, yeah.
And he, his aide at the time was a guy named Greg Walden.
What?
Yeah. And I remember, and Walden, I think, threatened to run against him as an independent. I'm trying to remember. He was going to run maybe as an independent, but if he got elected, he would actually side with the Republicans. And then Cooley ended up stepping down.
Okay.
Bob Smith, who had been the congressman, they reappointed him.
Okay.
And then, and now Greg Walden is in that office, in that seat.
Yeah, he is.
So that was a big story. I mean, we basically took out a sitting congressman, which, it was. We had another. Interestingly, so that was about Korea. We had a story before that, probably not too long after I came, a couple of years in the 80s, about a guy who was leading local Vietnam veteran parades, and they were going to have this big march to Washington, D.C. I don't remember all the details, but we also got word that he'd never actually been to Vietnam. He was not really a Vietnam veteran. He was making stuff up, and sure enough, that proved to be the case. So he kind of got uninvited from the march.
A little bit. Do you find that's kind of the power of journalism, that you can take, this congressman, for instance, someone who is saying one thing, as journalists, you find out something else, and you actually make a change. Something changes from a story that you've put out there, whether it's in the paper or online or in TV. I mean, that's really the power of journalism. It
really is. These days, it's, I think, kind of a diminished power because everybody has a voice, and you go online and there are things tweeted and reported otherwise that are absolutely not true, and that can be reported that they're not true, and it seems to have less impact these days than it used to. It used to be if somebody in a position of power was found to be lying, they would be on the ropes, and now it seems like, well, it's just politics now.
Yeah, I agree. And it's almost like, I feel not offended so much, but, I consider myself a journalist, and when we do stories, we do check everything out and interview, and all of these facts are coming from sources, not me. They're coming from other places. So it's sometimes a little disheartening when you do read stuff out there and you're like, from someone who isn't a journalist, and you're like, wait a second, where did you get that information?
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
Well, yeah, and the whole online thing, everybody can be a journalist now.
I know.
You just get a website and bingo, you're a journalist.
That's annoying.
And off you go, and then it turns out really that you're just a shill for one party or the other, and it's not just one party, it's that they're all in it,
Is it important do you call yourself a journalist?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it important for you to kind of hang on to that?
Yeah, definitely. That's the calling, really. I think that's why people get into it. You can make a difference. I always kind of thought, when I was a kid, I thought, well, what could I, maybe a little older than a kid, but in the young formative years, what can I do to make a difference? And I thought, well, you could be a police officer was one thing I thought.
Yeah.
Or you could be a politician back when maybe that was a good thing. It still is for some people.
It absolutely is.
And then I also thought you could be a journalist, and you can, tell people stories, and you can, shine the light into dark corners, and you can celebrate people who should be celebrated, deserve it, and
fight for the little guy.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's interesting when you're filling out like a doctor's form or something, and it says occupation. I never put like TV. It's always journalist, because it's very important for me, at least, to. That's what I went to school for. That's what I found this job for. That's what I wanted to do, is be a journalist.
Yeah, yeah. No, one of the great things about it is it's different every day. Every day is different, and you sort of have this, in the police scanners going in the background, and you always kind of have one ear trained on that. You learn over the years. You can be 100% focused on what you're doing, but somehow you got an extra 10% that's listening to that scanner in the background, and you never know what's going to happen, what's going to come across it, or what these days, what interesting email you might get from somebody that turns out to be a great story.
Oh, no kidding there. Yeah, this with the scanner, you hear something on there, and then you call and bug the dispatchers and confirm an address. And no, we bug them a lot, but they're very nice to us.
Yes, they are.
A lot of, over the years, because you've been here obviously a long time, other news people, other journalists in other markets always say, well, Medford, does a lot happen in Medford news-wise? And I think back to some of the big stories that even just I've covered. I'm thinking, there's a lot that happens in Southern Oregon and Northern California, which is part of our coverage area too. But a lot of stuff happens here. A lot of stuff has happened here over the last few decades.
Well, and the whole forest fire issue, now it seems like every summer. I mean, there's been some huge fires over the years that just were really national stories, and we're covering them locally, and now everyone holds their breath whenever there's a lightning strike.
No kidding. But even just, murder trials, there's been a couple of very, I don't want to say not high profile, but high profile for us, murder trials here.
Right.
And just an interesting.
Plenty of crime. There's no shortage of that. I always thought the more interesting stories, the crime stories, now, of course, we're not just in print, we're online.
Right.
And so you get these, we call parsley, which you can get the readout of what people are reading, crime stories. Boom. The crime stories get the traffic.
Right.
Natural, forest fires, some kind of big shared community event, which forest fire certainly becomes, especially when the smoke rolls in. Those are really off the chart.
Yeah.
But, and, just the really strong news stories. I mean, the really sad story about the 3 Eagle Point girls. I mean, that gets a lot of traffic. Not that anybody's counting traffic on those kind of stories,
right.
but I've always felt like the really good stories are what's a big issue in the community, and what are people trying to do about it, and just tell people here's whether it's homelessness or housing prices or drugs or whatever it is. Those are the important stories. Yeah,
we tell our reporters all the time, what are people talking about? What's going on? And
right.
Facebook, crazy enough, has become a huge part of that, because if you're going to talk about something, you're going to do it on Facebook.
Yeah. We have a couple of reporters who are really good at that. They really, they come up with great ideas because they're just watching Facebook all the time.
I know.
I'm not that good at watching Facebook. My wife, I actually have a whole bunch of Facebook friends, because when Facebook first started, I just, and people said, be my friend.
And you're like, okay.
So I did. So I signed up. So I just sure. So I have this really interesting Facebook feed. Everything from my high school friends to, elected officials. And so my wife she keeps an eye on that for me.
Good.
And she said, there's some good stories here. You should be paying attention to this. So.
Mail Tribune should maybe cut her a check.
Yeah.
Maybe. Getting back to, you were talking about there's more information out there than ever before. And I think you kind of already answered this. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or is it neither?
It can be a good thing, but it's gotten so warped that it's hard. Now it's like, alternative facts, or alternate facts. Is that
right?
Came out of the White House. We're that's the bad thing about it, is there's so much information, and you can post anything you want, and nobody's going to vet it. And certainly people have said over the years, well, journalists, you're liberal or whatever, and why are you letting this stuff print? Well, there's somebody looking at it. There really is an effort within newsrooms to be fair. People are people. I mean, everybody has their kind of built-in things they're interested in.
Yeah.
But there are editors looking at it. There's somebody checking to make sure this really happened?
Yeah.
This sounds maybe too good to be true.
Yeah. Do you have this number right? Yeah. All of that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, somebody who's the old, sitting in the basement and in their pajamas on the internet, they can put anything up there they want to, and that's the...
Which sounds great. Sounds like a great job.
It sounds very good. A cup of coffee.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. So you recently semi-retired.
Right.
Was last year? Was it last year?
Actually, it was a year and a half ago.
Okay. Kathy Noah's the new editor.
She's the new editor, right.
Editor of the Trib. So what's it been like the last year and a half?
It's actually good. I was trying to go to halftime, but I proved to be not very good at that. So it ended up being more like 3/4 time. And now I'm trying to get back down to halftime.
Right.
And I'm doing more... Like she's on vacation for a few days now, so I'm doing I'm back to being the city editor, basically filling in for her, because she currently kind of has 2 jobs, although that's hopefully going to change before too long.
Sure.
And I like that. I kind of like being in the trenches, being the getting the newspaper turned out every day, getting the stories posted online.
Yeah.
That's the rewarding part of it.
I agree.
That's what's interesting, as opposed to going to the meetings or figuring out budgets or all
Total
that stuff.
barf.
That's no fun.
I had an old co-anchor said something to me. You've been there so long, you're kind of like the queen bee now. And I always say, no, I'm still a worker bee, because in this market, and you can relate, everybody's got to pull their own.
Right.
We can't have anyone here sort of hands off.
Yeah, there's not a lot of, sit back in the office and think deep thoughts and send out.
No,
it's like, if you think of a deep thought, you got to go find somebody to get it done, or get it done yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely a hands-on situation for journalism in this valley.
And I wouldn't have it any other way.
No, it's great. That's the part I like. That's what I really kind of like now about what I'm doing. I'd like to get back to 20 hours. I could go fishing or skiing or golfing or whatever.
Well, good luck with that. Did you go skiing this year?
Not very many times.
Okay.
I went a few times.
It was a challenge with Mount Ashland, but they pulled it out.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Somehow. I don't know how they did it, but that's... I like Mount Ashland. It's nice. It's close. I always think that's one of the great things about the Rogue Valley. In February, a lot of times, you can get up in the morning and say, do I want to go golfing or do I want to go skiing?
Oh, the dilemma.
They're both right there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're wrapping up a little bit, so I'm going to get to the final 3. What's the best advice you've ever been given?
The best advice... Go to number 2, and I'll think about number 1.
Okay, I didn't, and this is my fault. I did not prep you on. I always try to prep everybody on the best advice, because it's a thinker. You got to think about it a little bit. Okay, well, we'll come back to that one. If you ever left the Rogue Valley, what would bring you back here? What would you miss the most about this place?
I just think all the people, all the connections you have. I always think it's weird when people, they live their whole life somewhere and then they retire and then they move to Arizona. I'm like, who do you know in Arizona? We don't know anybody in Arizona, but it's sunny.
It's warm.
Well, it's warm here a lot of the year too. So so I think it's the people. It is also a really nice climate, smoke notwithstanding.
Yeah, it's a pretty fabulous place to live.
It is.
I agree. And then if you were given a final meal and a final drink, what would that be?
Wow, final meal. Well, since apparently it isn't going to kill me, so I can have whatever I want. I'd have a big steak, steak, baked potato with all the
everything
junk on it.
Yes.
And probably raspberry pie with vanilla ice cream.
No one's mentioned dessert. Maybe 2 other people have said a dessert. Most people just stick
dessert.
to right. I agree.
And what would I have to drink?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd have an IPA.
Nice.
Probably not with the raspberry pie. That might be a little weird, but with the steak.
Okay.
Yeah, I have.
What's your favorite IPA right now?
Probably Sticky Hands.
Oh, Block 15.
Block 15 out
Sticky
of Corvallis.
Hands.
Really good.
All right, let's get back to that best advice you've ever been given.
Best advice I've ever given was don't ever put off a story as not being important and just try to take the shortcut to get it done. Just think every story is important, even if it's a little story. If it's 3 inches long, go back and make sure it's a good 3-inch story.
Right. And it's still news at the end of the day.
It's still news, and make sure it's done right. And that's the thing. It's like don't don't coast even on the little stuff.
Ooh, I like that. If you're listening to this podcast on iTunes and you like it, please subscribe, rate, and review. It helps other people find us. You can also check out the video portion of this podcast at ktvl.com. Just click on features and then off script. Bob Hunter, it was a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
Come back and we'll talk about beer.